Dr. Sarah stood at the edge of the medical bay, watching the chaos unfold before her. The massive space station Nexus Prime buzzed with activity as wounded soldiers from 3 different species were brought in from the latest skirmish with the Empire. Blood of various colors stained the pristine white floors while medical personnel rushed between treatment pods, their movements precise yet desperate. "Another human," sneered the lead medic, his scaled hands working over a wounded soldier. "What could your primitive medicine possibly offer here?" Sarah kept her expression neutral, though her jaw tightened slightly. She had heard variations of this comment countless times since joining the Galactic Medical Corps 6 months ago. The other species viewed human medicine as barbarically crude compared to their advanced technologies. While they relied on sophisticated nanobots, quantum healing chambers, and bioreconstruction matrices, humans still used what the galaxy considered Stone Age techniques: surgery, pharmaceuticals, and something the aliens found particularly amusing: the laying on of hands for examination. "Doctor," called Commander, a towering whose rock-like skin bore fresh battle scars, "we need you on triage duty. Sort the wounded by priority." The commander's tone was dismissive, the kind reserved for menial tasks. Sarah had graduated top of her class from the Mars Medical Institute and specialized in combat trauma surgery, yet here she was being assigned basic triage work that any first-year medical student could handle. She watched as doctor and the physician doctor worked on the most critical cases with their advanced equipment, while she was expected to simply categorize the wounded. "Understood, Commander," Sarah replied, moving toward the intake area where new casualties continued to arrive. The wounded came in waves. Soldiers with their naturally armored scales cracked and bleeding, warriors whose stone-like hide had been shattered by energy weapons, and whose delicate, almost ethereal forms seemed to shimmer even in their injured state. Each species had evolved differently, with unique physiologies that required specialized treatment protocols. As Sarah moved through the wounded, she couldn't help but notice things the other doctors missed in their rush to use their advanced technologies. A soldier marked as low priority caught her attention. His breathing was shallow, and while his wounds appeared superficial, something about his coloring seemed off. The scales around his neck had taken on a subtle blue tint that the others had dismissed as normal battlefield stress. "This one needs immediate attention," Sarah called out, but Doctor barely looked up from his quantum healing chamber. "The scanner shows minimal internal damage. He can wait," the doctor replied curtly. "Focus on your job, human. Leave the medicine to those who understand it." Sarah bit back her response. In her studies, she had learned that physiology included a unique respiratory system where stress could cause their scales to shift color, but a blue tint specifically indicated internal hemorrhaging that wouldn't show up on standard scanners. It was a subtle sign that required visual recognition rather than technological detection. Moving to the next section, she found a pilot who had been categorized as stable. The ethereal being's translucent skin showed no obvious wounds, and the bioscanners indicated normal life signs. But Sarah noticed the way the pilot's hands trembled, not from fear or shock, but in a specific rhythmic pattern. During her xenobiology studies, she had read about neurological responses to certain energy weapon exposures. "This pilot has neural pathway disruption," Sarah announced, but again her concerns were waved off. "The scans show no neurological damage," Doctor replied with obvious irritation. "Please stick to basic triage, Doctor. We don't have time for human guesswork." The hours dragged on as more wounded arrived. Sarah continued her assigned tasks while observing the treatment protocols used by her colleagues. Their technology was indeed impressive. Wounds that would take human surgeons hours to repair were healed in minutes. But she noticed something troubling. The technology seemed to mask underlying issues that old-fashioned human observation could detect. A young soldier caught Sarah's attention. His injuries appeared to be healing well under the bioreconstruction matrix, but his behavior troubled her. While we're known for their stoic nature, this soldier's stillness seemed different. His breathing was too controlled, his posture too rigid. Sarah had learned to read body language during her combat medicine training on Mars, where human intuition often meant the difference between life and death. "Commander," Sarah approached the leader, "I believe this soldier may be experiencing internal complications that aren't showing on your scanners." The commander's rocky features twisted into what might have been amusement. "Doctor, our medical technology is centuries beyond anything your species has developed. If the bioreconstruction matrix shows he's healing properly, then he's healing properly. I suggest you focus on tasks more suited to your limited capabilities. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks but maintained her professional composure. She had encountered this attitude throughout her career, the assumption that human medicine was inferior simply because it relied on observation, experience, and intuition rather than purely technological solutions. What these advanced species failed to understand was that human medicine had evolved to be adaptive, to work in situations where technology failed or wasn't available. As the shift continued, Sarah noticed patterns that the advanced medical system seemed to miss. The quantum healing chambers worked efficiently on obvious wounds, but sometimes failed to address underlying conditions that weren't immediately life-threatening. The nanobots could repair tissue damage, but couldn't account for species-specific complications that required cultural and biological knowledge rather than technological scanning. Doctor approached her station, his expression filled with condescension. "Doctor, I notice you've been questioning our diagnoses repeatedly today. Perhaps you don't understand that we've moved beyond primitive visual examination and manual diagnosis. Our technology eliminates the guesswork that plagues human medicine." "I understand your technology is advanced," Sarah replied carefully, "but sometimes direct observation can catch things that scanners miss." "Impossible," scoffed. "Our medical scanners analyze at the molecular level. What could human eyes possibly see that our equipment cannot detect?" Sarah looked around the medical bay. The soldier she had flagged earlier was now unconscious, his breathing even more labored. The pilot's tremors had worsened, though the bioscanners still showed him as stable. The young soldier remained motionless under his healing matrix, but Sarah could see the subtle signs of deterioration that the machines weren't registering. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "the difference is that human medicine learned to see the patient as a whole being, not just a collection of data points." Scales shifted to an irritated orange color. "Philosophical nonsense. Medicine is science, not art. Either a treatment works or it doesn't. Either a patient lives or dies. There's no room for human intuition in proper medical care." As if summoned by their conversation, alarms began sounding throughout the medical bay. The soldier Sarah had tried to flag went into respiratory failure. The pilot collapsed as neural pathway cascading began. The soldier's bioreconstruction matrix started flashing warning lights as his body rejected the healing nanobots due to an undiscovered allergic reaction. The advanced medical staff rushed to address the emergencies, their sophisticated equipment suddenly seeming inadequate as complications mounted. Sarah watched as they struggled to understand what was happening, their scanners and analysis systems failing to provide clear answers. "How did this happen?" Commander demanded, his rocky voice filled with confusion. "All three were stable just minutes ago." Sarah stepped forward, her heart pounding. This was her moment to prove that human medicine had value beyond simple triage work. But she also knew that speaking up would likely end her career with the Galactic Medical Corps. The other species would never admit that their advanced technology had limitations that human observation could overcome. "Commander," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them, "I may have some insights into these complications." The medical bay fell silent except for the urgent beeping of alarms and the hum of emergency equipment. All eyes turned to the human doctor who had been relegated to basic duties, the one they had dismissed as primitive and inadequate. Scales shifted to a deep purple, indicating extreme skepticism. "Doctor, these are complex medical emergencies requiring immediate technological intervention. This is not the time for human folklore." "With respect, Doctor," Sarah replied, moving toward the failing patients, "your technology is treating the symptoms, but it's missing the underlying causes. Sometimes the most advanced solution isn't the right solution." Commander looked between Sarah and his medical staff, his expression unreadable. The wounded soldiers were deteriorating rapidly, and their standard protocols weren't working. He had two choices: continue relying on proven technology that seemed to be failing, or trust the human doctor that everyone had dismissed as inferior. "Doctor," he said finally, "you have 30 seconds to explain what you think you know." Sarah felt the weight of every gaze in the room. This moment would determine not just the fate of 3 patients, but potentially the future of human medicine within the Galactic Medical Corps. She had spent years preparing for this opportunity, studying not just human medicine but the physiology and cultural contexts of every known species. The soldier's scale coloration indicates internal hemorrhaging that your scanners can't detect because it's occurring in specialized respiratory chambers unique to a subspecies, she began quickly. The pilot is experiencing neural pathway disruption from prolonged exposure to energy weapons. The tremor pattern indicates stage 2 progression. The soldier is having an allergic reaction to your healing nanobots, likely due to trace minerals in his system from his home planet's mining colonies. Silence stretched across the medical bay as Sarah's words sank in. These were diagnoses that couldn't be made through technological scanning alone. They required knowledge of species-specific physiology, cultural backgrounds, and environmental factors that human medicine had learned to incorporate into treatment protocols. Dr. the physician spoke first. The neural pathway theory, it's possible, but our scanners show no disruption. Because neural pathways exist partially in dimensional space, Sarah replied. Your three-dimensional scanners can't detect the damage, but the physical tremor pattern tells the story. Scales shifted again, this time to a confused yellow. Even if you're correct, what could human medicine possibly do that our technology cannot? Sarah moved with practiced efficiency toward the soldier, whose breathing had become increasingly labored. The quantum healing chamber continued its automated protocols, but the patient's condition was deteriorating rapidly despite the advanced technology working on his surface wounds. I need basic surgical tools, Sarah announced, causing a ripple of shocked murmurs through the medical bay. Scalpel, suction, and manual monitoring equipment. Dr. Scales flushed bright orange with indignation. Absolutely not. You want to perform primitive surgery with metal instruments when we have precision molecular repair systems. Your molecular systems can't reach the hemorrhaging because they don't recognize the location as damaged, Sarah replied, already moving toward the surgical supply area. Respiratory chambers exist in spaces between your scanner's detection grid. Commander watched with growing tension as Sarah gathered tools that hadn't been used in the medical bay for months. The other doctors relied so heavily on their automated systems that manual instruments were relegated to emergency backup supplies. Commander, I cannot recommend allowing this, protested, his voice rising. If this human damages our patient with her barbaric methods, the responsibility falls on you. The soldier gasped, his scales now showing the telltale blue-black pattern that indicated severe internal bleeding. The quantum healing chamber's readouts showed stable vital signs, but anyone with eyes could see the patient was dying. 30 seconds, growled. If you can't show immediate improvement, doctor, you'll be removed from this medical bay permanently. Sarah nodded, her hands already working. She approached the patient with the kind of calm confidence that came from years of training in high-pressure situations. While alien technology was impressive, human medicine had evolved in environments where doctors couldn't rely on sophisticated equipment. Field hospitals, disaster zones, and resource-limited situations where adaptation and improvisation meant survival. She placed her hands on this chest, feeling for the subtle anatomical markers that indicated the location of the hidden respiratory chambers. Her fingers found the pressure points that military medics used in emergency field situations. Knowledge she had gained by studying not just alien physiology, but alien military medical protocols. The hemorrhaging is in the tertiary air filtration chamber, Sarah announced, making her first incision. Your scanners can't detect it because evolutionary biology developed these chambers as backup systems, hidden from predators and parasites. As she worked, something remarkable happened. The soldier's breathing immediately became less labored as pressure relief allowed his primary respiratory system to function properly. The quantum healing chamber, finally able to detect the actual source of the problem, began working in harmony with Sarah's manual intervention. Doctor watched in stunned silence as his patient's vital signs improved within minutes. How did you know where to cut? He asked quietly. Human military medics train with every allied species, Sarah replied, not looking up from her work. We study not just anatomy, but field medicine techniques developed by each species' own combat medics. Soldiers learn this procedure in basic training for situations where technology isn't available. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The advanced medical technology had been so sophisticated that it missed basic field medicine techniques that the patient's own species used in emergency situations. With the soldiers stabilized, Sarah turned to the pilot whose neural pathway tremors had worsened. Doctora hovered nearby, her ethereal form shimmering with anxiety as her own bioscanners continued to show normal readings despite her patient's obvious distress. For neural pathway disruption Sarah explained, approaching the pilot, your bioreconstruction technology actually makes the problem worse. The nanobots try to repair pathways that exist partially in dimensional space, causing interference patterns. She reached into her medical kit, and something that made every alien doctor in the room stare in disbelief. A simple copper wire coiled into a specific pattern. It looked like something from a museum of primitive technology. "You cannot be serious," Doctora gasped. "You want to treat dimensional neural damage with metal." "Copper conducts dimensional energy differently than your nanobots," Sarah replied, carefully placing the coil on the pilot's forehead. "Monks used copper meditation tools for centuries before your species developed space travel. Sometimes the oldest solutions work because they evolved naturally with your biology." The effect was immediate and visible. The pilot's tremors began to decrease as the copper coil created a stable field that allowed his damaged neural pathways to reconnect properly. The bioscanners, which had been useless for detecting the damage, suddenly began showing improvement as the pathways stabilized back into three-dimensional space where they could be monitored. Dr. A's form brightened with amazement. "The harmonic resonance? It's actually creating a bridge for the damaged pathways to heal naturally." "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. "Your technology is incredibly advanced, but sometimes healing requires working with natural biological processes rather than overriding them." By now, the entire medical bay had gone quiet except for the steady improvement in the vital signs of Sarah's patients. Doctors from other sections had gathered to watch, as the human physician demonstrated techniques that none of them had learned in their advanced medical training. The third patient, the young soldier, presented the most complex challenge. His bioreconstruction matrix had not only failed to heal him properly, but was now actively causing his condition to worsen as his immune system fought against the foreign nanobots. "The matrix needs to be shut down," Sarah announced, approaching the final patient. Commander's rocky features showed deep concern. "Doctor, that matrix is the only thing keeping him alive. His injuries were too severe for natural healing." Sarah studied the soldier's file on the medical display. Born on 7, a mining colony where workers were exposed to rare mineral compounds that altered their immune responses. The bioreconstruction matrix was treating him as a standard, but his physiology had adapted to his environment in ways that the automated systems couldn't account for. "He doesn't need artificial healing," Sarah said, her hands already working to safely disconnect the matrix. "From mining, colonies have enhanced natural regeneration, but only if their systems aren't fighting foreign intervention." "That's impossible," protested Doctor, his scales now cycling through multiple colors of confusion. "Enhanced regeneration, our databases show no such adaptation." "Because it's not in your medical databases," Sarah replied, carefully monitoring the soldier's vital signs as she gradually reduced the matrix's intervention. "It's in their cultural medical traditions. Mining colony developed enhanced healing as an evolutionary response to constant mineral exposure, but the nanobots are suppressing his natural immune response." As the bioreconstruction matrix powered down, every alien doctor expected the soldier's condition to deteriorate rapidly. Instead, his body's natural healing mechanisms, freed from technological interference, began working with startling efficiency. The rocky plates of his damaged skin began knitting together at a rate that exceeded even the advanced matrix's capabilities. Commander stared at his healing soldier in amazement. "This is unprecedented. How did human medicine discover capabilities that our own species wasn't aware of?" Sarah finished monitoring the soldier's improvement and turned to face the assembled medical staff. "Because human medicine learned to ask different questions. Instead of asking, 'What technology can fix this?' we ask, 'What does this patient need to heal naturally?' We study not just biology, but culture, environment, and individual variation." The medical bay remained silent as the implications of what they had witnessed sank in. 3 patients who had been dying despite the most advanced medical technology in the galaxy were now recovering, because a human doctor had applied techniques that seemed primitive, but were actually more sophisticated in their understanding of biology as a complete system. Doctor approached slowly, his scales showing a pattern Sarah recognized as deep contemplation. Doctor, I owe you an apology. We dismissed human medicine as primitive, but what you've shown us is different, more complex in ways we didn't understand. It's not about primitive versus advanced, Sarah replied gently. It's about different approaches to the same goal. Your technology is incredible for trauma treatment and rapid healing, but sometimes the best solution requires understanding the patient as more than just biological data. Doctor drifted closer, her ethereal form pulsing with curiosity. These techniques you used, they're not just human medicine, are they? You combined human approaches with deep knowledge of our own species' traditional healing methods. Sarah nodded. That's what human medicine does well. We adapt and integrate. When we couldn't match your technological advancement, we learned to understand your cultures, your histories, your evolutionary adaptations. We became specialists in seeing the whole picture rather than just the immediate problem. Commander looked around at his medical staff, then back at Sarah. Doctor, I think it's time we reconsidered your role in this medical bay. But before anyone could respond, new alarms began blaring throughout the station. The distinctive pattern indicated incoming casualties from a major engagement, the largest wave of wounded they had seen since the conflict with the Empire began. All hands to emergency stations, came the announcement over the intercom. Prepare for mass casualty event, ETA 15 minutes. Sarah looked at the 3 patients she had just saved, all now stable and healing properly, then at the alien doctors who were staring at her with new understanding and respect. Doctor, Commander said, his voice carrying a tone of authority mixed with something that might have been respect. I want you leading the trauma team for the incoming casualties. Dr. Scales shifted to surprised yellow. Commander, with respect, leading the trauma team requires. It requires a doctor who can see what others miss, interrupted. A doctor who can adapt when technology fails. A doctor who understands that healing sometimes requires more than just advanced equipment. Sarah felt the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. In the span of a few hours, she had gone from being relegated to basic triage to being given command of the most critical medical operations on the station. But more than that, she had proven that human medicine had a vital role to play in the galaxy's future. I'll need access to basic surgical equipment for every species we're likely to treat, Sarah said, already moving toward the preparation area. And I'll need doctors who are willing to learn techniques that don't rely solely on technology. As the medical staff began preparing for the incoming casualties, Sarah noticed that the alien doctors were watching her with new attention. They asked questions about her diagnostic methods, about how human medicine approached complex cases, about the cultural and environmental factors she considered in her treatments. For the first time since joining the Galactic Medical Corps, Sarah felt like a valued member of the team rather than a primitive curiosity. But she also knew that the real test was yet to come. Mass casualty events pushed medical systems to their limits, and she would need to prove that human medicine could not only complement alien technology, but lead when the situation demanded it. The first wave of casualties arrived like a tsunami of suffering and chaos. Transport ships docked with metallic thuds that echoed through the medical bay as emergency teams rushed to unload wounded soldiers. The scale was unlike anything Sarah had encountered before, dozens of critically injured beings from multiple species, all requiring immediate attention. Status report, Sarah called out, her voice cutting through the noise as she took her position at the head of the trauma team. Massive assault on the defense line, reported Lieutenant, a young medical assistant. They used new energy weapons that our shields couldn't deflect properly. We're looking at burns, energy poisoning, and structural damage to multiple organ systems. Sarah surveyed the incoming wounded, her mind quickly categorizing and prioritizing in ways that her alien colleagues were beginning to recognize as uniquely human. While they relied on scanner-based triage systems, Sarah used a combination of visual assessment, species knowledge, and intuitive pattern recognition that seemed to cut through the chaos more effectively. Doctor, set up 3 quantum healing chambers for the most critical trauma cases, she directed. Doctor, prepare bioreconstruction matrices for structural repair work. but I want manual monitoring stations beside every automated system. The alien doctors moved to comply, though Sarah could see the uncertainty in their movements. They were used to working independently with their advanced technology, not as coordinated teams combining high-tech and traditional methods. The first critical patient was carried in on an anti-gravity stretcher, a heavy assault trooper whose entire left side had been devastated by energy weapons. His rocky skin was cracked and blackened, with energy burns that seemed to pulse with residual electromagnetic discharge. "Get him into quantum healing chamber 1, Doctor called out, his scales showing the focused blue pattern of intense concentration. "Wait," Sarah said, approaching the wounded. Something about the energy burns troubled her. While weapons were known for their destructive power, these wounds showed patterns she hadn't seen before. "Doctor, what do your scanners show for energy residue?" "Standard plasma discharge," replied, checking his readings. "The quantum chamber should neutralize the residue and begin cellular repair." But Sarah was studying the burn patterns more closely. The electromagnetic discharge wasn't random. It showed organized structure, almost like a crystalline pattern that suggested something more sophisticated than simple plasma weapons. "These aren't plasma burns," she announced, causing several doctors to look up from their work. "This is some kind of programmable energy weapon that embeds control patterns in the wounds." Doctora drifted over, her ethereal form brightening with curiosity. "Control patterns." Sarah traced the burn patterns with her finger, careful not to make contact. "Look at how the energy discharge follows specific pathways. If your quantum healing chamber tries to repair this normally, it might activate whatever program is embedded in these burns." The implications sent a chill through the medical team. If they had developed weapons that could turn the healing process itself into a weapon, standard treatment protocols could make injuries worse rather than better. "So what do we do?" asked Commander, who had arrived to oversee the emergency response. Sarah studied the wounded soldier, then looked around at the advanced medical equipment surrounding them. "We go analog, pure human surgical techniques to remove the affected tissue before any automated healing begins." "Manual surgery on energy burns," Dr. Scales shifted to concerned orange. "The risk of complications is lower than the risk of activating an unknown weapon program inside our medical bay," Sarah interrupted, already moving toward the surgical station. "I need basic surgical tools and someone to monitor vital signs manually." As Sarah began working on the soldier, more wounded continued to arrive. Each case seemed to present new complications that challenged standard treatment protocols. An pilot arrived with what appeared to be simple energy poisoning, but Sarah noticed that his dimensional stability was fluctuating in ways that suggested the weapons were designed to disrupt biology. "The nanobots can't treat dimensional instability," Doctora reported, her usual confidence shaken. "Our patient is phasing in and out of our reality." Sarah looked up from her surgery, her hands still working to remove the programmed energy burns from the soldier. "Try copper resonance fields, but adjust the frequency to match his natural dimensional phase pattern." "How do we determine his natural phase pattern?" I asked. "Ask him," Sarah replied simply. "Can sense their own dimensional state even when injured. He can guide you to the right frequency." It was such a simple solution that the alien doctors had overlooked it entirely. Their technology was designed to analyze and treat, but sometimes healing required communication and cooperation with the patient rather than imposing solutions. As the hours passed, Sarah found herself coordinating a medical response that combined the best of alien technology with human adaptability. She moved between patients, diagnosing problems that scanners missed and developing treatment approaches that no single medical system could handle alone. A group of soldiers arrived with synchronized symptoms that initially appeared to be identical injuries from the same weapons. But Sarah noticed subtle differences in their scale coloration and breathing patterns that suggested something more complex. "These aren't individual injuries," she announced after examining all 5 soldiers. "They're linked somehow. The weapons created a shared injury matrix." Doctor looked up from his scanners, confused. "Shared injury matrix? That's theoretically impossible." "Unless the weapons were designed to create psychic links between victims," Sarah replied, studying the pattern of injuries across all 5 soldiers. have latent telepathic abilities that most medical databases don't account for, if they found a way to weaponize those connections. The realization hit the medical team like a cold wave. If the weapons could create linked injuries, then treating the soldiers individually might cause unexpected complications in the others. Standard medical protocols had no framework for dealing with psychically linked patients. "So how do we treat them?" asked Lieutenant. Sarah considered the problem, drawing on her knowledge of psychology and human experience with treating psychological trauma in military units. "We treat them as a unit. Synchronized healing protocols, with each treatment applied to all 5 simultaneously." It required completely redesigning their treatment approach on the fly. Instead of individual healing chambers, they had to coordinate multiple quantum systems to work in harmony. Instead of separate monitoring, they needed to track the collective vital signs of all 5 patients. "This is incredibly complex," Doctor muttered as he worked to synchronize the quantum healing chambers. "Our technology wasn't designed for group treatment protocols." "But it can be adapted," Sarah replied, coordinating the timing of treatments across all 5 patients. "That's what makes this approach work. We adapt the technology to serve the patient's needs rather than forcing the patients to fit the technology's limitations." As the synchronized treatment began, the results were remarkable. The 5 soldiers began healing at a rate that exceeded individual treatment, as their linked physiology reinforced the healing process across the psychic connection. What had initially appeared to be a weapon designed to make treatment impossible became an advantage when approached correctly. Word of the innovative treatments began spreading through the medical bay and beyond. Other medical teams started consulting with Sarah's group, seeking advice on cases where standard protocols weren't working. The human approach of adapting technology to serve patient needs rather than following rigid procedures was proving valuable in ways that surprised everyone. But the biggest test came when Commander himself was brought in, wounded in a direct attack on the station's command center. The leader had been caught in the blast from a new type of weapon that seemed designed specifically to exploit the weaknesses of biology. "His entire nervous system has been disrupted," Doctor reported, his scales showing deep concern. "The weapon appears to have targeted the mineral matrix that forms the basis of neural function." Sarah examined the commander, noting the way his rocky skin had taken on an unusual crystalline pattern around the wounds. The damage was unlike anything she had seen before, but the pattern reminded her of something from her studies of cultural history. "This isn't just a neural attack," she realized. "It's an attack on cultural memory. Their mineral matrix doesn't just conduct neural impulses, it stores generational knowledge passed down through their rocky physiology." The implications were staggering. If they could not only injure soldiers but also erase their cultural memories, they could destroy not just individuals but entire civilizations' accumulated wisdom. "Can you reverse it?" asked Doctora, her form shimmering with anxiety. Sarah studied the crystalline patterns spreading through Commander's nervous system. "Maybe, but it will require something that none of our medical technology can provide." "What?" several voices asked simultaneously. The medical bay fell silent as Sarah's words sank in. Stone singing was an ancient practice that predated their space-faring civilization by thousands of years. Most of the younger generation considered it primitive superstition, replaced long ago by advanced medical technology. "Stone singing?" Doctor's scales shifted to skeptical purple. "Doctor, with respect, that's cultural mythology, not medicine." "Commander is dying," Sarah replied firmly, monitoring the spreading crystalline corruption in his neural matrix. "Your quantum healing chambers can't repair damage to cultural memory pathways because they don't recognize them as medical structures. But they are medical structures, just ones that exist at the intersection of biology and culture." Lieutenant consulted her medical database, her ethereal form flickering with uncertainty. "The stone singing practices aren't in any of our treatment protocols. Most military personnel wouldn't even know how to perform them." Sarah studied Commander's file more carefully. Born on the original military service spanning 3 decades, decorated veteran of multiple conflicts. But buried in his personal background was a detail that gave her hope. "Commander was raised in the traditional mountain clans," she announced. "Before joining the military, he would have learned stone singing as part of his cultural education." The problem was that the commander was unconscious, and the crystalline corruption was spreading through his memory matrix faster than any conventional treatment could address. Sarah needed to find a way to access those buried memories and guide his own biology in performing the healing ritual. "Doctor," came a voice from the medical bay entrance. "I may be able to help." Everyone turned to see Elder, an ancient who served as the station's cultural liaison. His rocky skin showed the deep mineral patterns of extreme age, and his movements carried the deliberate precision of someone who had lived through many generations. "Elder," Sarah said respectfully, "do you know stone singing techniques?" The elderly approached Commander's treatment table, his ancient eyes studying the crystalline corruption spreading through his leader's neural matrix. "I was a stone singer before I became a cultural liaison, but these wounds, they are unlike anything our traditional healing addresses." "That's where human medicine comes in," Sarah explained. "We can guide the stone singing with surgical precision, targeting specific neural pathways while the traditional techniques restore the cultural memory matrix." Doctor looked between the human doctor and the elderly, his scales cycling through multiple colors of confusion. "You want to perform surgery while conducting a cultural ritual, the interaction between traditional techniques and modern medical technology. Will be unprecedented," Sarah finished. "But so is a weapon that attacks cultural memory. We need an unprecedented response." Elder began examining Commander more closely, his ancient hands finding specific pressure points that corresponded to traditional healing practices. "The corruption follows pathways that our ancestors knew well. Stone singing was developed specifically to address wounds that affected both body and spirit." "Can you teach me the basic principles?" Sarah asked. "I need to understand how the traditional healing works so I can coordinate it with surgical intervention." What followed was a crash course in cultural medicine, unlike anything in Sarah's medical training. Elder explained how stone singing worked by resonating with the mineral matrix that formed neural pathways, creating harmonic frequencies that encouraged proper healing patterns. "The songs are not just sound," the elder explained, his voice taking on the deep, rhythmic tones of traditional chanting. "They are vibrational patterns that speak directly to the mineral structure of our physiology." Sarah listened carefully, her mind working to translate the cultural concepts into medical terminology she could understand. "So the stone singing creates resonance frequencies that guide cellular repair at the mineral level." "More than cellular," replied. "It guides the flow of ancestral knowledge through the neural matrix. Each carries the accumulated wisdom of their lineage in their mineral structure. The corruption is severing those connections." As the elder began the stone singing ritual, Sarah prepared her surgical instruments with careful precision. She would need to work within the rhythm of the traditional healing, using modern surgical techniques to remove corrupted tissue while the stone singing guided the restoration of damaged memory pathways. The procedure that followed was unlike anything anyone in the medical bay had ever witnessed. Sarah's hands moved with surgical precision, carefully excising corrupted mineral structures while Elder's deep, resonant chanting filled the room with harmonic frequencies that seemed to vibrate through the very walls. "Remarkable," whispered Dr. her form brightening as she observed the procedure. "The stone singing is actually guiding the regeneration of neural pathways that our scanners can't even detect." Other medical staff gathered to watch as human surgical technique and ancient healing practices worked in perfect coordination. Sarah's modern instruments removed the damage, while the traditional ritual provided a framework for proper healing that no amount of advanced technology could duplicate. "The crystalline corruption is retreating," Doctor reported, his scales showing amazed yellow patterns. "The mineral matrix is restructuring itself according to the harmonic patterns of the stone singing." As the procedure continued, something unexpected happened. Commander began responding to the stone singing even while unconscious, his deep voice joining the elders' chanting in harmonies that suggested his cultural memory was not only being restored, but actively participating in his own healing. "He's remembering," Elder said with satisfaction. "The ancestral knowledge flows through him again." Sarah continued her delicate work, removing the last traces of the crystalline corruption while the stone singing guided the reconstruction of damaged neural pathways. But as she worked, she began to understand something profound about the integration of different medical approaches. This isn't just about combining techniques, she realized aloud. It's about understanding that healing sometimes requires addressing aspects of patients that technology alone cannot reach. Doctor looked up from his monitoring equipment, his scales showing contemplative blue patterns. You mean their cultural identity is actually part of their biological structure? For absolutely, Sarah replied, making her final surgical cuts. Their mineral matrix stores not just individual memories but generational knowledge. You can't heal one without addressing the other. As the procedure concluded, Commander's vital signs stabilized and the crystalline corruption was completely eliminated. But more importantly, his neural matrix showed patterns that indicated full restoration of his cultural memory pathways. The commander's eyes opened slowly, focusing on the faces gathered around his treatment table. "Doctor," he said, his voice carrying the deep resonance of someone whose cultural connections had been fully restored, "you saved more than my life." "Elder provided the traditional healing," Sarah replied. "I just made sure the surgery was precise enough to support it." "No," Commander said, sitting up carefully. "You did something more important. You proved that advanced medicine and traditional healing can work together when someone understands both." Word of the successful procedure spread quickly through the medical station and beyond. The combination of human surgical precision with cultural healing had not only saved Commander, but had also demonstrated a new approach to medicine that could address problems no single medical system could handle alone. Doctor approached, his scales showing patterns of deep respect. "I owe you more than an apology. You've shown us that medical advancement isn't just about better technology, it's about better understanding of what healing truly means." But before Sarah could respond, new alerts began sounding throughout the station. The pattern indicated an incoming priority transmission from the front lines. "All medical staff to briefing room," came the announcement. "Emergency strategic consultation required." As the medical team made their way to the briefing area, Sarah couldn't help but notice the changed dynamics among the staff. Alien doctors who had dismissed human medicine just hours earlier were now asking her questions about diagnostic techniques and treatment approaches. The successful integration of traditional and modern healing had opened their eyes to possibilities they had never considered. The briefing room was filled with military commanders and medical personnel from across the station. On the main display screen appeared Admiral, or the fleet commander whose ethereal form shimmered with urgent concern. "Medical teams," the Admiral began. "We've received intelligence that the Empire is preparing to deploy a new class of weapons specifically designed to exploit the medical techniques of each allied species." Sarah felt a chill run through the room as the implications became clear. The enemy had been studying their medical responses, learning how to turn their own healing technologies against them. "They've observed our treatment protocols and developed weapons that activate when specific medical procedures are attempted," Admiral Orr continued. "Standard medical response will now trigger secondary attacks within patients." Dr. Scales paled to worried white. "If our own medical technology can be turned into weapons, then we need medical approaches that the enemy hasn't observed and can't predict," Sarah finished, understanding immediately where this briefing was heading. Admiral Orr's form brightened as he focused on the human doctor. "Doctor, your innovative medical techniques have proven effective against weapons that were designed to exploit conventional treatment protocols. We need you to develop entirely new medical strategies for treating war wounds." The weight of responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders as she realized what was being asked. She would need to develop completely new approaches to combat medicine, techniques that combine the best of human adaptability with alien technology in ways that the enemy couldn't anticipate or counter. "How much time do we have?" she asked. "The next major engagement is scheduled in 72 hours, the Admiral replied. "You'll have the F-72 hours later." Sarah stood in the redesigned medical bay of the battleship Covenant as the largest engagement of the war approached. The space around her bore little resemblance to the sterile, technology-dependent facility she had first encountered months earlier. Now, quantum healing chambers worked alongside traditional surgical stations, while cultural artifacts from a dozen species hung beside advanced monitoring equipment. "Final systems check," Sarah called out to her integrated medical team. The response came from doctors representing every major species in the Alliance, each trained in both their own advanced techniques and the adaptive approaches that human medicine had taught them. Doctor, his scales showing confident blue patterns, supervised the preparation of hybrid healing stations that combined quantum technology with human surgical precision. Adaptive trauma units ready, Doctor. Each station can switch between automated and manual protocols based on weapon signature analysis. Doctor coordinated the dimensional healing sections, where bioreconstruction technology worked in harmony with cultural practices from multiple species. Treatment pods prepared. We're ready for attacks that target reality phase stability. Elder had been joined by cultural healers from every allied species, creating a council of traditional knowledge that stood ready to address attacks on cultural memory and species identity. The Stone Singers, Star Dancers, and Dream Weavers are prepared for coordinated cultural healing protocols. But Sarah's greatest innovation was the integration network itself, a medical system that treated the entire medical bay as a single adaptive organism rather than individual treatment stations. When the deployed weapons designed to exploit specific medical technologies, the network could instantly shift protocols, drawing on techniques from across the spectrum of allied medical knowledge. Admiral or to medical teams, came the announcement over the communication system. Enemy fleet detected, engagement commencing in 30 minutes. Sarah moved through the medical bay, making final checks on preparations that had consumed every waking moment of the past 3 days. She had studied not just the medical traditions of every allied species, but also their cultural practices, evolutionary histories, and even their philosophical approaches to healing and warfare. The key insight had come from humanity's own medical history, the realization that the most effective medical systems emerged in environments where technology was unreliable or unavailable. Human medicine had evolved to be adaptive precisely because humans couldn't rely on any single approach to healing. Doctor, Commander approached, his recently healed form showing the deep mineral patterns that indicated full cultural memory restoration. The command staff wanted me to express their confidence in your medical innovations, but I wanted to add something personal. Commander, you didn't just heal my wounds, he said, his voice carrying the resonance of stone singing. You proved that strength comes not from having the best individual capabilities, but from knowing how to integrate different strengths into something greater than their sum. Before Sarah could respond, the first wave of battle alerts began sounding throughout the ship. The engagement had begun, and soon they would discover whether her revolutionary medical approaches could counter this anti-healing weapons. Incoming casualties, reported Lieutenant, her ethereal form brightening with focus. Initial reports suggest new weapon types targeting our hybrid healing stations. The first wounded arrived within minutes of the alert, soldiers bearing injuries unlike anything the medical teams had encountered before. They had clearly developed weapons specifically designed to counter the adaptive medical techniques that Sarah's team had been using. These wounds are specifically designed to trigger cascading failures in quantum healing chambers, Doctor reported, his scales showing alarmed orange patterns. The moment we begin standard treatment, the injuries activate secondary damage patterns. But Sarah had anticipated this development. Switch to Protocol Omega, she announced, activating the medical bay's most radical innovation. Instead of treating each patient with the medical technology of their own species, Protocol Omega assigned patients to healing systems from completely different cultures. Soldiers were treated with dimensional healing techniques. Warriors received quantum therapy modified with human surgical intervention. Pilots were healed using traditional stone singing combined with human trauma surgery. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The weapons, designed to exploit specific species' medical responses, had no framework for countering cross-cultural healing techniques. Weapons that should have turned healing technology into secondary attacks instead found themselves unable to activate because the treatment protocols they had been designed to exploit weren't being used. Remarkable, breathed Doctor, as she successfully treated a heavy trooper using modified bioreconstruction techniques. The weapons can't adapt to healing methods that don't match the patient's species. But the true test came when a group of human soldiers arrived, Earth Marines who had been caught in a concentrated assault. Sarah realized that the enemy would have studied human medical responses just as carefully as those of the alien species. These wounds are designed to exploit human surgical techniques, she announced after examining the injured Marines. Every approach that human medicine would normally use will trigger weapon activation. The solution required the most radical adaptation yet, treating human patients using purely alien medical techniques that human biology had never encountered before. Sarah found herself directing quantum chambers to heal human soldiers while dimensional healers worked on injuries that existed partially outside three-dimensional space. "This shouldn't work," muttered Doctor as his quantum healing chamber successfully treated a human Marine's energy burns. "Human physiology isn't compatible with healing frequencies." "It works because we're not trying to force compatibility," Sarah replied, monitoring the treatment carefully. "We're finding the universal healing principles that exist beneath species-specific approaches." As the battle continued and more casualties arrived, Sarah's medical bay became a laboratory of adaptive healing that challenged every assumption about species-specific medicine. Human doctors learned to use stone-singing techniques. Healers discovered the effectiveness of human surgical precision. Medics found that traditional approaches could enhance their quantum technologies. The breakthrough moment came when a mixed unit of soldiers from all allied species arrived simultaneously, all wounded by the same new weapon that seemed designed to exploit every known medical technique at once. The weapon creates linked injuries across species lines, Sarah realized, studying the interconnected damage patterns. "It's trying to turn our own alliance against us by making it impossible to heal one species without harming another." The solution required something that had never been attempted in galactic medical history: a completely integrated healing approach that treated multiple species as a single biological system while respecting their individual physiologies. "All teams synchronized healing protocol," Sarah announced. "We're going to treat all 7 patients as one interconnected organism." What followed was a medical procedure that combined quantum healing chambers, dimensional bioreconstruction, traditional stone singing, human surgical precision, and cultural healing practices from across the galaxy into a single coordinated effort. Each technique supported and enhanced the others, creating a healing matrix that was greater than the sum of its parts. The weapon, designed to exploit the weaknesses of individual medical systems, found itself facing a healing approach that had no individual weaknesses to exploit. Instead, it encountered an adaptive network that turned the weapon's attempt to create division into an opportunity for even stronger alliance. "All patients stable and healing," Doctor reported, his scales showing patterns of amazed satisfaction. The integrated approach neutralized the weapon's linking mechanism completely. As news of the successful treatment spread throughout the fleet, Sarah realized that they had achieved something more significant than just medical innovation. They had proven that the greatest strength of the Alliance lay not in the individual capabilities of each species, but in their ability to combine their unique strengths into approaches that none could achieve alone. "Doctor," Admiral Orr's voice came over the communication system, "preliminary battle reports indicate that our medical innovations have been so effective that the fleet is withdrawing. Their anti-healing weapons have been completely neutralized." Sarah looked around the medical bay at the diverse team of healers who had learned to work together in ways that transcended their individual species' limitations. Human adaptability had provided the framework, but the real success came from the willingness of every species to share their knowledge and learn from approaches that seemed foreign to their own traditions. "Doctor," she said to the doctor who had initially dismissed human medicine as primitive, "what do you think we've proven here?" His scales shifted to the deep blue of profound contemplation. "We've proven that advancement isn't about having the most sophisticated individual capabilities. It's about having the wisdom to recognize that sometimes the most powerful solutions come from combining different strengths rather than perfecting individual techniques." Doctor drifted over, her form pulsing with satisfaction. "You taught us that healing isn't just about fixing what's broken, it's about understanding the connections between all the different aspects of what makes someone whole." Elder approached with the measured steps of ancient wisdom. "The young human doctor has shown us something our ancestors knew, but we had forgotten. That true strength comes from unity that honors diversity rather than uniformity that erases it." As the last of the wounded soldiers were declared fully healed, and the medical bay began transitioning from emergency protocols to standard operations. Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from dismissed outsider to leader of revolutionary medical innovation. She had started by proving that human medicine had value despite being less technologically advanced. But in the end, she had demonstrated something more important, that the future belonged to those who could find ways to combine different strengths rather than compete to prove which individual approach was superior. Dr. Commander approached for a final conversation before returning to his command duties. The Galactic Medical Corps has asked me to inform you that they're establishing a new division of adaptive medical integration. They want you to head the department. Sarah smiled, looking around at the medical bay that had become a symbol of what different species could achieve when they worked together rather than in isolation. I accept, she said, but only if the department is staffed with healers from every allied species. This approach only works when everyone contributes their unique knowledge. As the battleship Covenant continued its journey through space, its medical bay had become more than just a treatment facility. It had become a model for what the galaxy could achieve when different species learned to value what each could contribute rather than compete to prove superiority. The human healer who had once been mocked for her primitive techniques had changed not just the battlefield, but the understanding of what true advancement meant in a galaxy where diversity was the greatest source of strength resources of the medical corps and priority access to any cultural or technological information you need. Sarah looked around the briefing room at the faces of doctors and commanders who had gone from dismissing her as primitive to relying on her for the future of their medical capabilities. The challenge ahead would require not just medical innovation, but a complete reimagining of how different species could work together to achieve what none could accomplish alone. Sarah looked around at her alien colleagues, knowing that what she was about to suggest would challenge every assumption they had about modern medicine. We need to perform a memory reconstruction using traditional stone singing techniques combined with human neurosurgical precision. It's never been attempted before. The next few hours would determine whether her success with 3 patients was a fluke or a glimpse of what human medicine could achieve when given the opportunity to show its true potential. Sarah looked at the 3 dying patients, then back at the assembled medical staff. Let me show you.